they've been really, really brainwashed. We actually think we can provide a better education for our children.
In this time, the way you educate your kids is now considered a political position.
And don't treat them as he or she is, because then you're going to confuse them quite a bit.
That's kind of leading me into the topic of politics, right? Where we're seeing a lot of things happen to kids that shouldn't be really happening. And the big crux of it is, yes, fatherlessness, but it's also this willingness to discard with like traditional things for children. And so there's these kids are growing up in this weird world where everything is upside down. Nothing really makes sense. Nothing is actually true or not. It's just kind of it's in the atmosphere, and whatever you want to take from it, you can take from it. How do you deal with that as a parent? How do you navigate around? You're in California too.
Yes.
So how does that happen?
So there's a couple of things, I think, a couple of ways you can deal with it. Now, I am in California, but it would be unfair if I said that I am in California living amongst the general kind of culture of California.
I see.
I live in a subculture. Probably 90-something% of my friends are Armenian.
Oh, wow.
And they're Armenian. And a majority of that even are Armenians of a certain variety, say Bible-believing, God-fearing Armenians. But even Armenians as a culture tend to be more conservative.
Right.
So when I express views amongst my non-Christian Armenian friends, it's not really like, oh, I can't believe you just said that, right? Unless they've been really, really brainwashed, younger generation. Like my peers, I'm 37 years old.
Right.
My peers, everyone actually reaches out to me who aren't Bible-believing Christians, and they're like, are you paying attention to this stuff? Like, it's going nuts, And I'm like, yes, I know, we have a biblical ground for this. So it's great because it gives me an opportunity to speak about God. Yeah. But that's the kind of what I'm existing in. With that said, one of the things my wife and I have done is made a decision very early on to homeschool our children. Now, I got to say this.
Amazing.
The reason why we homeschool is because we actually think we can provide a better education for our children than the public education system.
Absolutely.
Now, somebody might be sitting there and going, who do you think you are? Well, I have a minor in education. And okay. I was on my way to become a high school history teacher. So I've done student teaching. I've taught at every level, elementary, junior high, high school. In the church context, I've taught young adults, college students. I've taught at colleges. My wife is an educator as well. She has a degree in education.
So who do you think you are? Literally teachers.
Yes, we're a family of teachers. We really are. And we're both gifted in that. My wife actually teaches English as a second language. Oh, wow. And so we decided, hey, we don't like the system. The system forces us into a certain direction, educationally, like when it comes to the philosophy of education, that we don't agree with and we think we could do better than this. So we try to educate them in a more classical format, classical education. So one of the things that my wife did is got with friends, and they've created a homeschooling cohort, essentially.
Wow.
That's got, it's probably like more than 40 students now. But a bunch of the parents volunteer in various ways. If the parents can teach various subjects, they do. If they can help cook lunch and all that stuff. So our kids, like, when they go to school, they're essentially going to this like gigantic homeschooling thing that's been created. And they've set up a curriculum, all this. It's like years of work. So that's
this is so encouraging to hear, man, because this is something we're dealing with a lot in New Jersey. Like, we have Phil Murphy here as the governor, and the way the school system looks now. I don't have kids. I have a girlfriend. We're on our way, to marriage. But this is something we talk about because I think it's important to bring up these big issues beforehand, right?
Correct.
And it's really refreshing to see that somebody else has done this, because I've heard that there is this possible solution, but it sounds like so much work. And to see that there are people that have actually done this as a community and really said, all right, we want to build our own alternative without getting the government involved, without getting just the teachers, the parents, and the students, right? Like, that's the core emphasis, and like the mutual shared values. That's so encouraging to hear, man. So
and other people have done it, as one of the funnier things is that Catholics have done this really well. Mm-hmm. Like, there's a bunch of stuff we can learn from the way some Catholic organizations and schools have set up.
Absolutely.
To be able to replicate a model like that. And so, yeah, I mean, it's classical education amongst Catholics is really strong and good. And it's becoming stronger and better amongst Protestants. And it could just be taken and replicated. I think it could be done in even a local church context where you have like 3-4 families that have kids around the same age, and you get, hey, let's get together and let's educate our kids. You're good at that. I'm good at that, you know. And then if we need to hire some folks who know stuff we don't, bring them in. And so education-wise, that's what we've done. I'm not kind of a parent who is like, I don't over shelter my children as some Christians do. Right. I have age-appropriate conversations with my children. I want them to hear this stuff from me. I realize that not everything that they're going to be exposed to is going to be from me. They're going to get exposed to the world as I was growing up. I didn't grow up, like I said, I didn't grow up in a Christian home, so I kind of know the bad side of that. Right. And so, but we navigate it. We talk about it. We encourage reading, wide reading, and just like being intelligent individuals.
Yeah.
I don't have let me frankly say this. I don't have a guarantee my kids are going to grow up and be Christians.
Right. I don't think any parent does, right?
Well, some people don't, but they live like they do. And then they get disappointed when that's not the case, right? Like, and I've seen this.
So you live as if you don't have that guarantee, is it?
Yeah, because I was a youth pastor for many years, and I would have parents come to me and say, what's going on with my kid? And I said, look, your kid has to make a decision for himself or herself to follow Jesus. You're a solid Christian. I love you. I know you. But your child is not. Right. And don't treat him as he or she is, because then you're going to confuse them quite a bit. Let them first believe and follow Jesus, and then we'll deal with all the other character kind of mishaps or whatever.
Yeah.
So I don't have a guarantee of that, but here's one thing I tell my kids. I say, look, one of my goals, I guess, as your parent, is to raise you up to become a mature, wholesome individual.
Right.
So even if my kids don't end up becoming Christians, if they end up becoming kind of well-rounded individuals, then I've done my job well. Now, ideally, I would want them obviously to become Christians. But again, that's not something that's guaranteed to me. So I do my job in that sense. Like, okay, everything we're doing in our house, how is that aligning itself in a way where our kids are going to grow up to be well-rounded individuals? So reading is something we encourage quite a bit. We try to get them to read as much and as wide as possible. Again, age-appropriate stuff. So my oldest son, like I said, he's 8. Last year he read about like 90 books or so. And these are books that are about 120, 130, 170 pages. And so we're trying to up that number. He really likes kind of fantasy. And so we're getting him those sorts of books to read, and then we'll expand on that as he grows older. But
that's awesome.
Those things will help quite a bit.
One of the things you brought up that I loved is that you said that the Catholicism has done a good job in building an educational institution. And I see that too. I'm a product of Catholic schools, right? So I went to Catholic school up until my sophomore year of high school. And so my whole life was spent there as a child. And so I do see the value in that. And I do think that the church, the Protestant church as a whole, needs to invest more in that side of things. And I think that's going to be probably the best solution for evangelism in the future, is creating places that actually educate kids in the gospel along with everything else, right? And I think that's a really cool solution, which brings me to kind of furthering the political conversation. Like in this time, the way you educate your kids is now considered a political position, which is crazy, right?
Sad, huh?
Yeah. And I was talking about this on the last video that I posted, but even saying you want to be married and have gender roles is a political position. And so where do you see the church fitting their politics, or where do you see politics fitting inside of Christianity, and how should that look in the individual lives of a Christian? Well,
I think first and foremost, and there's before I answer this, I think for the Christian, there should always be a tension between our citizenship that is above, that is heavenly, that is in the kingdom of God, and our citizenship on earth, to whatever nation we might belong to as Christians, right? Because Christianity is cross-national, cross-ethnic.
Yes.
And being too committed to our nations is too committed in the sense of where it would go against, I think, God's ways of doing things is bad. is not good. At the very least, a Christian should be living in the tension of these things. If there's no tension, I think there's a problem. If you think everything America does is right, there's a problem.
I don't think there's anyone
let's hope not. I mean,
for the better, for the worse, you know?
Yeah, let's hope not. But the way I look at it is you start off with that kind of a mindset that I'm a citizen of heaven and my citizenship is not here. I'm passing through. But in the midst of passing through, in the midst of being here, there's a certain kind of impact. There's a certain kind of involvement that I can have that hopefully will make things better.
Right.
Now, the question is, when you say it's going to make things better, that's a worldview assumption already.
Yes.
Because better means I have an idea here that's really, really good, and we don't have that happening.
You have a direction you're moving
and we got to let's just say, I'll give you a very, very good, actually, example of someone I know in my home country, Armenia, who's doing this, who's a Protestant. So in Armenia, there's some kind of a weird cultural thing, and this exists in the Middle East quite a bit, where when people have children that are born with different kinds of handicaps, they kind of will give them away to orphanages.
Wow.
It's very, very sad. It's a very sad reality. This culture of caring for the most kind of needy in that kind of a context doesn't exist. In America, I think there's a certain kind of culture that does exist.
Yeah. There's also the reverse where, now people want to abort children based on whether or not they have Down syndrome.
We have that issue that we deal with in our culture. But so this friend I have has essentially started programs for kids like this. So it's not like they're orphans in the sense, they're not like orphans in the sense where their parents have died.
Right.
Their parents are very much alive. Some of them actually will go and visit them some throughout the year. Some of them do not, but they're like severely handicapped. And so they will run camps for these kids. They will, get needs. Like that is actually, you have an idea that's better. The culture doesn't have that idea, and the culture needs to be reformed to have that idea.
Right.
So like adoption is something that's really, it's looked on very well, I would say, in America. That's not the case in all places in the world. There's countries where adoption is looked on from a negative perspective. Like, why would you take someone else's child? That's just a weird thing to do.
Yeah. And it's a uniquely Christian idea.
Correct. So the Christian's going to come in there and say, hey, God adopted us.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to portray that in a very physical sort of sense. So
Absolutely.
When it comes to the impact of my politics, that's the way I look at it. So I look at it and say, okay, God has all these ideas, and he does, because God is he's the one that knows all things, right?
Yeah.
And so God's got these thoughts, his ideas in regards to what makes society better and good and so on and so forth. And then as a Christian, I try to implement those ideas into my life personally, into my politics.